Junior Science and Humanities Symposium, another statewide competition for high school students. And we also do outreach for pre-K through 12th grade, basically working on critical thinking and problem solving skills for the next generation of scientists and engineers. And so I'm thrilled to welcome you to our second in a series for the City Nature Challenge, which my co-host, in a sense, Rebecca Lipson, who I'll introduce in a second, will explain a lot more about. But we're just really happy to have you here. Looking forward to a nice afternoon learning more about the National Phenology Network and how it fits into citizen science. So Rebecca, you want to go ahead and give us some background on what motivated this series, the City Nature Challenge? So this is Rebecca Lipson.
Definitely, thank you so much. So though I have a number of different hats that I wear in various work and other circles, I just put a link in the chat there. This is to the Pima Master Naturalist website. So the Pima County Master Naturalists are an all-volunteer organization here in Tucson that helps to support different local efforts to connect people to the environment. And so it's really an organization that supports other organizations, we can say. And so many of the master naturalists that go through our training and become members are supporting organizations like the Botanical Gardens, the Desert Museum, Tohono Chul Park, the Pima County Natural Resources and Parks and Rec. So a lot of different opportunities for people to support organizations that are connecting people to nature and helping them learn about this place that we live. And so the City Nature Challenge is actually a global online bioblitz. And so it uses the platform iNaturalist, which you'll learn a little bit about today during this talk. And you can find out more at that link that I put into the chat. And so it's basically a 4-day observation period where people can make observations anywhere within Pima County, and they're able to then add those observations onto iNaturalist, and it just becomes kind of this storehouse, right? And people can get on our project on iNaturalist, and they can help to identify all these different things that people are seeing. And so it really becomes like this interactive challenge, right? To go out and document as much biodiversity as you can find. And so, like I said, it happens on a global level. And so we're able to see all of these wonderful observations from all over the entire world. We have around 450 cities that are participating. So the City Nature Challenge here in Pima County, as I said, is really organized by the Pima County Master Naturalist. And at this website, you'll see all sorts of information here to help just kind of guide you to being a part of that. So Margaret and I decided to partner for these talks to really just share with people what you can do through community science projects. So like the City Nature Challenge, like the National Phenology Network that Theresa will talk about this evening. And so, and then how we can bring that into really the spheres of teaching and working with young people. And so, so that said, I'm going to just point out on the website that there are other events. We have one last SARSEF series coming up, and that is going to be here on Tuesday, April 26th, so 1 week from today, and it's how community science data is used in research, and that will be with Katie Prudick from the University of Arizona. And yeah, I think with that, I'll let you all just explore this on your own. If you had any questions, I will put my email into the chat as well, that you can contact me about the City Nature Challenge specifically, and Pima County Master Naturalist more broadly.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's awesome. I'm so excited about that weekend of April 28th, is it, or 29th? 29th.
29th, so it starts on a Friday and goes until May 2nd. So it's all day Friday through the very end of the day on Monday.
Monday.
4 days.
Awesome. It's super exciting. I hope that Tucson and Pima County just really rocks it. It's going to be really fun. So it's my pleasure now to introduce to you our featured scientist tonight. Theresa Crimmins is the director of the National Phenology Network, which she will explain to you exactly what that is. I could say I could tell you a bit about it. It looks at the sort of life histories and timing of organisms. But she is a research professor at the University of Arizona in environment and natural resources. And so we'll have time for lots of questions and discussions about how what she has to share with us can relate to your classrooms or to your work with younger students, and maybe getting them engaged in authentic research questions, asking, following their curiosity to answer questions and using data that's already collected, which is pretty darn cool. So Theresa, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much. And thanks so much, Margaret and Rebecca, for all of the work that you do, and to the teachers that are joining us right now too. Thank you. I'm a mom and I have 2 kids in public schools, and I just can't thank teachers enough. And I just feel like you're the most underappreciated, underpaid job out there. Okay, so I'm excited to chat with you today, and I'm not going to chat for super long because I want to leave lots of opportunity for questions and discussion. But to kind of kick us off, Margaret and Rebecca invited me to just come and speak about basically the importance of documenting what we see in the natural world. And so what I'm showing here is just a bunch of photos. This is actually photos that a colleague and I brought together. We were sitting down together one time, and you know how you get kind of chatting. And I think the conversation might have even been inspired by recent activity on iNaturalist, where we're saying, oh, look what I just saw recently in the upper left. That's a night snake a baby night snake that we had in our house last monsoon. And I was amazed that our cats didn't get to it first and kill it. Down in the lower quadrant here, we've got some of those cats. These were COVID cats, at least the one that's coming out of the cupboard above the fridge and the one that's coming out of the pine tree, the Christmas tree, were mine, that were born here at my house during COVID. My colleague is a birder, so many of the bird pictures are hers. I happen to have a son who's just really, really into insects and arthropods. And so all of the photos that you see on here that are the beetles and the scorpion with the babies on its back and the mama wolf spider with the babies on her back are all photos that happened to be on my phone, that when I started flipping through, I was like, oh, this is a cool picture. This is a cool picture. But the really important thing about these well, there's many important things about these photos. One is that it's just really fun to look back and remember the moments that led to us having this archive of photos. But in addition, they really have value because they serve as a record of when and where something was. And that is what iNaturalist does, by engaging folks like ourselves in documenting something. When we see it, that photo is an indisputable image of an organism, perhaps doing something. And because it's collected digitally, if you collect it on your phone or with a digital camera, it is automatically stamped with a date and a time. And as long as those settings aren't wrong in your device, then that is information that's attached to that photo. And then finally, if you collect it using a device that has a built-in GPS, like your phone, if it's turned on, you also have the location information attached to it. And hopefully those pieces stay together. And if you submit it to something like iNaturalist or some other programs, those pieces of information do stay together. And it becomes, it can be a record of information that can be referenced into the future for a whole variety of applications. And so conservation wants your photos of what you see. Your photos have value, like I said, simply because of what is contained in them, but also because of the information that is conveyed. And the photos that we're collecting now can be tied to, become part of a resource that enables us to tell a story about how things have changed and how they're going into the future. And so these are just a couple of examples here of where folks are documenting bits of information that, once it's documented and formally recorded, can be referenced and used in really an endless number of applications. And so on the left side, I included this image in particular because this woman is taking a picture of cherry blossoms. And cherry blossoms are really widely appreciated both in Japan as well as in other parts of the world because of their ephemeral nature and their beauty. And so they're often, there's lots of photos that are taken of these events. They're heavily anticipated, the big wildflower events, and lots of people, take off work to go visit them. And people have been keeping track of when cherry blossoms have flowered, in Japan in particular, since the 800s. So we have an extremely long record of when this event has occurred, that we can compare what's happening now to in the past to understand how things might have changed. And it might not come as a surprise to you that for many, many decades and centuries, there was variability in that record in Japan of when the cherry blossoms were coming out. But on average, it wasn't changing. It was, earlier or later from year to year. But if you calculated a line through it, there wasn't change. That changed in the last 150 years with the onset of the Industrial Revolution and when we started pumping CO2 into the atmosphere. And in 2021, last spring, we had the earliest recorded flowering in cherry blossoms in Japan ever. And that's part of a trend that's been taking place in the last several decades where it's really coming. There's still that variability, 1 year seems early and 1 year seems late, but that in general, especially compared to the previous millennia, it's a lot earlier. Oops, I keep trying to pretend like this is a PowerPoint. There's a growing number of instances where the kind of information that you can document through photos simply by submitting them through something like iNaturalist can actually be very valuable to conservation activities. And of some really great recent examples of this, the image on the left is a plant called the Tumamak globeberry, which is a rare plant that was only in the last couple of weeks first reported in Saguaro East National Park. Prior to the volunteers that were out there looking for plants, documenting it, there was no knowledge that this plant was occurring on those park grounds. So that's a really cool thing that this rare plant was discovered there. And it's really exciting that it was discovered by folks that are not necessarily park scientists. It does mean then that the park staff will now have to kind of keep that in mind as they're planning future activities like controlled burns or trail building or other activities. But this is exciting to be able to discover new rare species. The same kind of thinking applies to rare species like the ocelot on the right, where if we have, and in many cases, documentation of rare species like this isn't necessarily achieved usually by folks out with their smartphones. We generally see this kind of information when we place things like trail cams out, which are permanently placed and triggered by motion sensors, and then you have to go and collect the images off the cameras. But having those cameras placed out on the landscape can help us understand what's going on and then directly inform management actions. And so I won't go into depth in this at all, but there are a number of programs that you can help document formally what you're seeing, where and when, because basically that's the key ingredients that we need to be able to better manage and better understand what's happening. The iNaturalist program, the one with the green bird logo on the left, is the program that Rebecca was just talking about that the City Nature Challenge and BioBlitz programs leverage. And it's very simple and pretty much like one click once you get it set up on your phone to be able to document what you see when you see it. The next one, Nature's Notebook, is a program that my organization runs. And it's a bit more in depth, in honesty, because what we're seeking is not just single snapshots of what's happening on the landscape, but we're interested in understanding how those things are changing on individual organisms over the course of the season. So Margaret got it right when she talked about timing, because the thing that we're really focusing on in our program is called phonology, which is a really wonky, old-fashioned word for when stuff happens seasonally. So things like, when do leaves come out? When do different species of flowers bloom? The fact that we're just starting to see saguaro blooms appear and open. I saw my first saguaro flower just 2 days ago. That's phonology. And we keep track of that through this program, Nature's Notebook, across the whole country to document when events like saguaros are flowering, when those are occurring across the landscape and through time. And so I'm happy to talk about that program if there's interest, but basically what it entails is selecting individual organisms. So like I have a desert willow in my backyard, and I make observations on it approximately once a week or whenever I think about it. And I go out and I document, do I see leaves on it? Yes or no? Do I see flower buds? Yes or no? Do I see open flowers? Yes or no? Do I see fruits on it? Yes or no? And so it's a little more in depth because we're constructing a kind of a temporal record of what is happening on that particular tree over the course of the season. And then the other two programs that are listed on here, eBird and eButterfly, are really more focused, obviously, on birds and butterflies, but they are similar programs where you're going out and documenting what you're seeing for those taxonomic groups when you're going out and going on a hike, for example. And so with all of these programs, the fact that we have humans all across the globe actually making these observations with this time and date stamp information and location information, all of these data are being funneled into huge databases, which are loosely being referred to here as data lakes, that when we take those observations and combine them with other kinds of information, say temperature and precipitation observations, or information that's being collected on satellites that are orbiting the globe, or about snowpack, we can start to really understand not only what we're seeing, but why and why things might be changing. And the kind of information that's being documented through these programs has direct impact on actions that professional scientists and professional managers can put into operation immediately. And so the picture on the left is folks spraying herbicide on buffalo grass. And since I'm talking to a local community, I probably don't have to tell you the story of buffalo grass. It's that invasive grass that we're seeing more and more of when we look up on I'm pointing at the Catalina Mountains right now because I can see patches of it from my house. It's that tawny colored, low elevation grass that didn't used to be there because it was introduced as cattle forage and has kind of escaped and is now kind of taking over on the landscape. And last year's monsoon really gave it a leg up in a lot of locations. It's best controlled, well, one way that, as you probably know, it's controlled by hand pulling and bagging and taking the plants off site. But when that's not manageable, another preferred approach for trying to control the grass is to treat it with herbicide. But the herbicide is only effective when the grasses are at least 50% green because of the way that the plant uptakes the chemicals and then ingests it. And managers are challenged by the fact that our monsoon precipitations are so heterogeneous, and in many cases they manage a lot of land, and they're trying to decide on a daily basis, where should I send my crew? Should I send them to Sabino Canyon or Pima Canyon or to Tumamak Hill, which is likely to have the greenest buffalo grass, and therefore we can have the greatest impact by sending people out today. And so one of the things that my program has done is set up a website where anybody can make an instantaneous observation on where they're seeing buffalo grass and how green it is. And that all gets channeled into a database that we plot on a nightly basis that is available for those managers to make hopefully those better informed decisions about when and where to send their crews out to try to manage this rapidly spreading grass. The butterfly on the right is a copper skipper, I think, and that's a species that has dramatically changed the timing of its flight. And we know this because huge amounts of data have been contributed by, again, citizen scientists, non-professional folks that are just out on the landscape keeping track of what's happening. And that information is now being used by the US Fish and Wildlife Service for better understanding whether the species should be protected or not. And as we mentioned before, these observations can connect with records that we have from the past, like the cherry blossoms and the bowerbird on the right, which is one of the ones that Darwin talked about when he talked about evolution and adaptive radiation. We can understand now how our species may be changing their how they might be speciating and becoming distinct species through time, through that active process of evolution. These photos, again, can help us define the present. We can understand things like migratory species like this pelican and where and when they are. We now know that certain birds are much more likely to use certain bodies of water than others, simply because people have been documenting this kind of stuff, again, through these kinds of programs. And this information can be used to better predict the future. The kinds of data that are coming in through these programs are to a really great extent being used to build constructive or predictive models for understanding what are the conditions that are associated with their presence, and are those things changing? And so one of the biggest ways in which these data are being used is to help understand whether species are likely to experience mismatches in the future. So for example, on the left, we have a hummingbird, which is a pollinator, and the plant that it pollinates. And these species depend on each other. The pollinator, that might be a migratory species, needs to arrive at its say a new location if it's coming to the north for in the northern hemisphere for it to come to its breeding grounds in the summer. It needs to plan its visit to arrive when those flowers that it depends on as a food source are going to be flowering. And if it's not, if it misses that window, then that poor bird is going to go hungry. And in return, the plants that need that pollination service want to time their flowers to be most abundant when those pollinators are arriving. And over the course of evolution for many millennia, that things have evolved so that they do happen in sync. But the fact that our climate is warming and the conditions are changing so rapidly, some species are advancing their phenology to a greater extent than others, and we are starting to see mismatches among especially these kinds of pairs where migratory species that are coming from the south are, especially long distance migrants, are cued by things like sun angle, which isn't changing. So their timing isn't really advancing much, but the flowers are advancing because they're responding to warmer temperatures, and they are advancing. And so we are starting to see these kinds of things. We're just starting to see hints at them. We anticipate, though, that we may be facing more. And so the kind of information that we get through these programs can help us better understand what consequences may be around the corner, and then hopefully try to adjust and maybe even adapt or make changes. So with that, I think I'll stop there, and I'm happy to either pivot and talk about Nature's Notebook specifically, or more about how iNaturalist works, or any kinds of things that you might like. I wanted to just kind of be flexible and responsive.
Thank you, Theresa. It's just, number one, the photos are fabulous, and the stories that each pairing showed was really intriguing and kind of captivating. It was really wonderful. I wonder if do any of our audience have questions that they'd like to ask? There's a question in the chat. Is it necessary to record as a part of an already established project?
That is such a good question. Would you like me to answer it?
Yes, please.
Okay, I would definitely argue yes, because by doing so, your data are, for one thing, archived. They're hopefully, the thinking behind all of the programs that I just gave a really light mention of there is that it's a repository, and it's a repository that's intended to be maintained in perpetuity, hopefully, beyond my lifetime, I hope. And so by doing so, for one thing, your data are then stored safely. For another thing, you're making it available for others to use. And so therefore it is available for, any number of applications for scientific discovery or management kind of applications. It does take more effort. These programs typically are built around robust observation protocols. So especially with ours, we're kind of specific about what we ask folks to observe and how we define things. However, there's lots of opportunities to opt out of stuff for sure too. Like if you're only interested in tracking flowering, you can just skip over all the leaf out and fruiting phases or events. That's fine.
So for clarity, because when I first read the question, I think I've explored the National Phenology Network many years ago as a teacher, and not maybe so much recently, but so there's different projects that you might sign up for that would require.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe you could give us a little background on if people
Sure.
wanted to participate, what would that, and I don't know, Theresa, does that involve Nature's Notebook? Yeah.
So I can speak to that. I can definitely speak to that most readily. So the way Nature's Notebook is set up is that if you go to Nature, it's naturesnotebook.org, or that's actually an alias for the main website. But either way, how it is set up is that, again, you're registering individual plants or you're looking at animals at a site. And so we kind of lay it out as join, get going in 3 easy steps. It's a little more nuanced than that, but basically the steps are to create an account for yourself. And then once you've created your account, you register a site that you're going to be observing, and then register one or more individual plants or animals to that site. And then you can start observing. There are, over 1,600 species of plants and animals available for monitoring. So you can search that list if you know, for example, if you want to observe in your yard or on your school grounds, and you want to see, are the species that are on that property something that you can track through here. You can just come to the species search page and scroll around and explore. You could filter by the state pretty easily to see what we have available in Arizona. But then you can pick whatever you want there. But then we also have, let me go back here. I'll go to the main page to hopefully make this easy to follow. We have a number of campaigns that you can participate in as well. And so what those are focused efforts to encourage folks to track on particular species for particular reasons. In some cases, these have been motivated by researchers coming to us saying, we want more data on particular species because we have this question. In other cases, it's more driven by a management need. So for example, the nectar connectors is one where it's focused on tracking the timing of flowering in a bunch of different plants that are important nectar sources for monarchs and other pollinators. Another one that is popular here in Arizona is the flowers for bats, where we track again, mainly flowering in its agaves and saguaros, because those are important food sources for migratory bats. And actually the bat that they are specifically a food source for are a bat that was recently delisted by the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they're trying to keep track of how well the populations are doing. And this is one of the important pieces of information that they need to be able to understand how the bats are doing. So you can go about it that route. And then finally, another thing that we have, this is a little trickier to find on our site though, right now, so I'll shortcut it, is there are a number of established groups participating in Nature's Notebook, which we refer to as local phenology programs. And we have a bunch of them here in Tucson. And so I'm going to cheat and type in Tucson phenology trail here, because this takes us directly to the page, if I can find it, that shows us all the different organizations that are participating here in Arizona. And there are a bunch. So this is maybe also a good place to start. And then there is a lot of information on how to get going and how to connect up with local folks in the Tucson area. And map is broken. That's too bad, because we have this really cool map that showed all of the partner locations. I wonder if this will work. Well, here's a list. Darn. I will follow up on seeing. Wow, I didn't realize 40. We have 40 places now in the Tucson Basin that are a part of this. Yay!
That's fantastic.
So,
That's
yeah,
awesome.
I don't know how
Empire High School on there.
Yeah. There's
some
definitely some schools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I saw Pima County West basis. Monzo Elementary, cool. Yeah.
So
same here. Yeah, awesome.
And so, yeah, if that's intriguing at all, either, connecting up with any of these existing groups, or just maybe entertaining that option of becoming part of this broader kind of local network, I can put you in touch with the folks on our staff that coordinate this. I am unfortunately not the lucky person that gets to interface with all these groups. My job is more get the money and make the program work.
Looks like it's working from the list, at least certainly locally. I love Tucson. They always talk about Tucson being the science city. And when you see all those amazing organizations and the schools and educators, parks, and Desert Museum, it's really wonderful to see everybody pitching in and doing that. Excuse me.
Yeah, and maybe one other thing I should speak to too, because you mentioned this at the beginning, is I'm kind of focusing on all the actions and ways in which you can participate and collect data and contribute to this database, but there are also lots of ways in which you can access the data and use it too. So maybe just for fun, I'll show some of that as well. We have had a number of schools use the program. And so we're working on cleaning this up. This is a little overwhelming, to be honest, and we are aware of it. But if you go to this Educate tab, it takes you to a page that has a lot of resources on it, including curricula materials that have been developed for different grade levels. We're in the process of kind of thinning these out, because the lists are kind of long, and some are easier to pick up and run with than others. And what we really want to do is put in some effort to try to get these things mapped to the various standards. And I think it's hit or miss, depending on, again, which resource you're looking at and who developed it, whether that is clear or not. And there's a bit about it right there. So that might be worth checking out. That's probably the best place to start if you're toying with the idea of using any of this in your classroom, just so that you don't have to start from scratch. But so I wanted to point that out. And then I also wanted to just mention that in addition to, like I said, all the ways that you can contribute data, you can explore the data too. And so I think, yes, it's under here, under the more ways to connect. There's so much, there's really so much to get through. But the visualization tool is a pretty accessible tool intended for folks of any skill level to be able to, well, I shouldn't say any, but most skill levels, to be able to access the data that are in the database without having to download it and know what to do then. I can point that out to you too, but we have a little less materials to support the, downloading the data and doing stuff with it. Rather though, if you come here, you can readily access it, query the data and plot it without, again, without having to touch it in Excel or something like that. So when you roll up here, there are a number of these kind of like pre-canned visualizations where you can see some of the data, and I don't even know what we'll get if we click these. I haven't explored these lately, but what these do is kind of introduce you to the types of ways that the data, that you can explore the data. And so I can see that it's querying right now, and what it's going to do. All right, it worked. What we're seeing is the timing of Quercus, which is oak, pollen release in the last 3 years. And I don't know what location this is for, but probably that thing that I dismissed told us. And so, it just pulled the data live, and it's plotting this year's data up through today. So that's pretty cool. And then I think if we go back, yes, you just hit back and you can explore some of the other stuff. So we can also look at things like, how do winter temperatures correspond to leafing in the soapberry family? And so this is going to be a bivariate plot where it's going to show us when things happen and winter temperature. And again, the text that's in the gray box is intended to kind of orient you to what you're looking at and help you explore it. So these pre-canned ones, again, kind of show you stuff, but you can also build your own visualization in a bunch of different ways. You can plot the data just for a particular site and look at it through the years and for different species, or you can aggregate data across a bunch of sites and compare across species or across years, or you can look at the activity of a particular species or group of species and some environmental conditions like this one is working on doing, and there must be a lot of data because it's taking a while. And there is a really nice, I think I can do this while that's running, because it's in a different tab. If you pop back here, this information here, and especially further down just on this page, will talk you through how to generate any one of these kinds of plots. Yes, Rebecca, do you have a question?
I do. So I am more familiar with iNaturalist, and I know in iNaturalist you can see when you kind of pull out certain sections of data, it will tell you how many people contributed that data. So I'm wondering, when I was looking at that graph that you just had up about the pollen release, one thing I wondered was if there's a way to see if roughly the same number of people are reporting that data from year to year, or could some of the variability be changes in the number of people that are making those observations?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I believe I have to make that plot again. That was this one. I'll let the other one run too, and we'll just see if it eventually populates. I believe the axis was scaled to account for that. I didn't pay close enough attention to know. Okay, yes, it is. It's normalized. So what this is, it takes some effort to make sense of all this, and that's why I'm recommending to explore some of the resources on this page to just kind of understand what all this is about. Basically, what we're seeing is the proportion of records that are yes. And so on any of these dates where there's a dot, that means that we're aggregating values that were collected on that date and probably the whole week surrounding it. And so for whatever region we're looking at, and I'm not sure what it is because I can't quite tell.
It said Western
states. Pardon?
It said Western states.
Oh, great.
I caught it this time. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Then, we may have 5 observations and we may have 500, but what it's doing is saying, well, of those 5 or 500, how many of those observations were a yes? And so I should have backed up a step, but every time someone's making an observation on their oak tree, they're saying, do I see pollen release, yes or no? And so in this case, we only had 0.01. So it probably was, what is that? I can do the math, 1 out of 50. Or is it 500? Anyway, it was a very small fraction of yeses. And then when we get up here, it's a larger value. We're up to 20%. And it doesn't surprise me, honestly, that this doesn't scale to something larger, because if we really are looking across that large of a region, and the quercus is all the oak species being pulled together, then it's tough to really pin it down. Plus, pollen release is not a event that a lot of people report on, because it's a tricky one. I don't know if you're familiar with oak flowers and what they look like, but they are, since they're wind pollinated, they're not big, beautiful, showy flowers. They're very tiny, and it's super hard to tell when they're open. And if the tree is really high and the canopy is way over your head and those catkins are way up high, forget it. So this doesn't surprise me at all that it's, still a small proportion, but does that help?
Yeah, and Andrea has another great question here. Oh, yay, that
yeah.
And I was just going to say, I was just in the mountains last weekend. When I first drove up, I thought all the juniper trees were dying. I have never seen so much pollen, so many male cones going off at once. Like everything was brown, totally brown.
Yeah.
I thought they were dying, but no, it was like clouds of pollen. They were pollinating the junipers. It was crazy. Yeah.
So
but
we do ask people to track phenology of junipers, and pollen release is one of them. And I really love it. On our protocol, the choices are: do you see a little pollen or a lot of pollen? So you clearly would have qualified for a lot.
I heard that a neighbor called someone and said, I think there's a fire. I think I'm seeing smoke. And they're like, no, it's pollen.
Oh man.
It's a lot.
That's bad.
So Andrea asked in the chat that they're doing that Nature's Notebook seems like a perfect setup for getting specific information for a specific area, and her community is monitoring pollinators on a group of native plants with students at ASU, but they don't have a NPN project per se. Is it possible for them to create their own project so they could like that long-term mentoring beyond just a course?
Yes.
Increase the mentoring to all points around us over time. That's Andrea's question.
So I'm sorry, I guess there was more to it. I thought the question was just, can they set up their own project?
That's one. And then let me just make sure I correctly represent this. Create your own project that will continue to monitor these plants for a period of time, or to increase the monitoring to all plants around us over time.
So yes, absolutely. Everybody is welcome to participate. And I encourage you, especially if you're thinking about engaging a group of folks, to reach out, because we've got super fantastic team members that can help coordinate, help you get things set up that work as best as possible for a group. And especially if you've got a group of observers or individuals that are tracking on the same individual plants, we want to get that set up properly in our database, so that everybody's making observations on the same plants. But yes, if you have the desire to not only observe in a single location, but at multiple locations, we can help you coordinate that too, and perhaps even advertise it more broadly if that's the kind of thing that you have in mind. So let me put my contact info in the chat, and I can definitely get you connected with folks that can help. We would love that. But I don't mean to steal iNaturalist's thunder. So it's just different. One is not better. iNaturalist is really just more for those discrete, instantaneous, I see this thing and I want to document it. And it's also great for finding out what something is. We don't really offer that service. Ours is more like, if you're willing to make a commitment to track something through time, ideally over the course of the season, and then hopefully even for subsequent years, to really help build out that temporal record. That's kind of like the difference there. But
I think they're really complementary. I was actually just looking at the nectar one, because one of my hot projects, I guess, over the past 2 years of being at home was to really plant a lot more native species in my yard. And so I have like 3 different kinds of milkweed, and I was looking at the milkweed plants that are listed there, and the pine leaf milkweed is one that I have in my yard. And so, you know, you can always use iNaturalist to identify the plants and then report their phenology on Nature's Notebook, right? So there are definitely ways to use these things just in different ways to benefit the community at large. And the other thing that I really enjoy, I had no idea. I've always just heard of milkweeds as attracting monarch butterflies. I had no idea how many insects love milkweed. And so I have, you know, dozens literally of photos of different bees and moths and butterflies and beetles and, you know, all sorts of different critters that just absolutely love those flowers and that plant. I even had a praying mantis hanging out for days at a time on that milkweed. And so, you know, I think for me, that's how I use iNaturalist. Is I take photos of all the stuff I'm finding that's attracted by what I plant in my yard, and then identify all those things. So it's definitely, you know, I love the way the tools can interact together. So there's room for all of it, for sure.
Yeah, in our conversation last week with Molly Hunter and Isabel, the high school student from Cienega High School who used iNaturalist for her research project, though she did use primarily iNaturalist, she had to consult other citizen science or community science databases to get information that iNaturalist didn't supply. So I think for all educators and, you know, those of us who are working with young people interested in using these databases, it's good to keep a really open mind to know the strengths and the, you know, the shortcomings maybe of particular data sets. And I love, I know Theresa, you just closed your, the link, but it is possible if a person wanted to download specific information, I think on the the Data Explorer tab, you could actually download specific data sets. Is that correct? So if
I actually
I'll never be a, you know, actual researcher, but we need some science fairs for those sort of amateur adult scientists out there.
So I'm pretty sure this button right here downloads the actual data set. Yes. So awesome. This is, I didn't introduce this because this is, again, getting even more complicated, but this is an online querying tool that takes you through the steps of pulling data from our database. And so basically you're filtering it by the date range, locations, the different species, phenophases, which are the events like fruiting or flowering or mating. And the nifty thing about this is if you are just plotting things through the visualization tool and you feel like you really want to get that underlying data because each one of these dots is a distinct record, you can do that. And so what I clicked on was the export data button, and it took me to that query tool. And what it's saying is everything's already preset here, so you can customize this if you want, or you just go straight to download. So yeah. Again, this is kind of a little deeper end of the pool for understanding exactly what the data are and what to do with them. And we are actively developing more resources for, it's more advanced level, like high school and above, but for how to access and manipulate those data. And, you know, it's very well suited for statistical analysis and that kind of stuff.
Do you know, Theresa, and I don't want to go into the weeds here, but do you know, is it downloaded as a CSV file or something like that? Okay, great. Yep. So most high school students and teachers could figure out how to use that or move it into Excel or to some other data analysis like or something.
Yeah. And I'm pretty confident that there are some resources on the education tab that I pointed to earlier that do have some of that in there.
What a fantastic resource.
Thank you. Thank you. There's all I see is all the opportunity that we haven't yet realized, but you're right. It's good to celebrate what we have.
Absolutely.
I have a quick question and maybe a thought to leave you with to think about, Theresa. Is Palo Verde one of the plants that we can record? Okay, because of course they're gorgeous and in bloom right now. And they are not the source of everybody's allergies, right? So we'll clarify that right there. They are not what's causing you and I to sneeze. I finally this week have felt better, but the last 2 weeks I've had horrible allergies too. But I've been seeing more and more people in some online forums advocating for a Palo Verde festival, much like people have cherry blossom festivals, right?
I like it. I like it.
Celebrate this season of the Palo Verde.
They call it the yellow season. It's so beautiful.
Right.
It's just, it's from one of our indigenous cultures, the yellow season, and it's so appropriate. It's so perfect. Yeah.
Yep. So there you go. I just wanted to plant that idea in your mind to give you something to just think about, mull over a little bit, and maybe someday we can manifest this.
I love it.
Awesome. Andre's in. 25 years. All right. Time to make it happen. That's fantastic.
Oh, wow.
It could be so cool though. It could, I mean, beyond just a celebration of Palo Verde, it could really just be a celebration of all of the local native plants that, and you know, the resources that they provide. It just, I think would be, it's so, it's just such an eye-catching phenomenon, right?
Yes.
I think people can.
And then I've been looking for the carpenter bees because my classroom that I had for many years was right behind a giant blue Palo Verde. So my office looked out through the yellow, and I would just see all these carpenter bees all the time. And so, yeah, when I was on a walk yesterday, I was like, the Palo Verde are doing great. Where are the carpenter bees? You know,
I've seen them.
I've seen them.
I don't have a Palo Verde in my yard, but my next door neighbor has a really large one, and so. They come through.
I don't have the research, you know, I don't have the what am I trying to say, the point of reference really to say whether there's more or less, you know. They're more dispersed in my experience now because I'm not in the same place, but yeah, anyway, so something like this could really help document all that. Are there we only have like a minute or two left. Are there any other questions from our guests that you'd like to ask Theresa? This has been such a special hour. And feel free to unmute and talk. I should have said that. No? Well, we really thank you, Theresa. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing about the National Phenology Network and about Nature's Notebook. It's really super exciting, and what a great resource. And I hope we all think about that and start to contribute to it. Rebecca, thank you for bringing us all together. And I just want to say, you know, if you have any students pre-K through 12 in your life, whether you teach them or are parents of them, SARSEF is here to support you and your students in exploring authentic science and engineering opportunities. So please reach out. I think everyone probably has my email, but I'll put it in the chat as well. It's just margaret@sarsef.org. And thank you all so much for being here.